Everyone in the imperial court knew one thing for certain. General Reyna Voss was the most dangerous woman alive. She had won 43 battles without losing a single one. She had walked through fire, literally, during the siege of Hartwell, and came out the other side with nothing but a scar along her jaw and a colder look in her already cold silver eyes. Soldiers twice her size trembled when she entered a room. Even the emperor, the man who ruled half the known world, cleared his throat nervously when she spoke. So when the emperor announced her punishment, nobody envied whoever was going to carry it out. She disobeyed a direct order, the emperor said, pacing his golden throne room. His advisors stood in a straight line, all of them staring at the floor. She burned the bridge at Coldmere before we could use it for retreat. Yes, it won the war, but she did it. Without my permission. She saved 10,000 lives, someone whispered. She also embarrassed me in front of the southern lords. The emperor stopped pacing. She will not be executed. She is too valuable. Instead, she will be confined to the east wing of the palace under constant supervision. I want someone assigned to her, someone who will report her every move, keep her from causing trouble, and remind her daily that she serves me. Every advisor suddenly found the marble floor very interesting. I'll do it. The voice was clear, confident, and completely out of place. Everyone turned. Captain Sarah Cole stood at the back of the room, her dark hair pulled into a neat braid, her brown eyes steady. She was 24 years old. She had never commanded more than 40 soldiers. She was, by every measurable standard, the least intimidating person in the room. She was also the only person who had spoken. The emperor stared at her. You understand who you are volunteering to watch? General Reyna Voss? Yes, Your Majesty. You understand she once made a decorated war commander cry by simply looking at him. I heard it was 2 commanders, actually. Sarah paused. I'll be fine. The emperor looked at her for a long moment, then made a sound that was almost a laugh. Very well, Captain Cole. The general is yours to manage. Try not to die. Sarah had expected to find the general brooding dramatically by a window, maybe sharpening a sword or glaring at the wall. She had not expected to find Reyna Voss doing push-ups on the floor of her assigned chamber, still in full military uniform, completely ignoring the fact that she had just been stripped of her command. Sarah knocked on the open door. General Voss? Reyna didn't stop. Whatever you're selling, I don't want it. I'm not selling anything. I'm Captain Sarah Cole. I've been assigned as my babysitter. Reyna finally stopped and sat up. She looked at Sarah with those silver eyes, the ones soldiers wrote horror stories about. I heard. The emperor thinks punishing me with an annoying shadow will break my spirit. Will it? Reyna stood. She was taller than Sarah by at least 3 inches, all of it lean muscle and composed fury. She looked Sarah up and down slowly, the way you might look at something unexpected you found in your pocket. No, Reyna said, but you're braver than the others. They all sent their regrets before they even got to my door. She tilted her head. Why did you volunteer? Sarah met her gaze without blinking. Because everyone was too scared to, and that annoyed me. Something shifted in Reyna's expression. Not warmth exactly, more like interest. Like a cat noticing a mouse that wasn't running away. You're going to be trouble, Reyna said. Sarah smiled. Probably. That was how it started. The first week was a battle of wills. Reyna woke at dawn and ran laps around the East Wing courtyard until Sarah, who had to follow her, was breathing hard and pretending she wasn't. Reyna read military strategy books and asked Sarah pointed questions to see if she'd been properly educated. She ate meals in complete silence and watched Sarah from across the table like she was trying to figure out what she was made of. Sarah did not crack. She answered every question honestly, including the ones designed to humiliate her. She admitted she had never commanded a large-scale battle. She admitted she found the emperor's decision to punish Reyna frustrating. She admitted, when directly asked, that she thought burning the Coldmere Bridge had been the right call. Reyna had gone very still at that last one. You're saying the emperor was wrong? Reyna said carefully. I'm saying 10,000 soldiers got to go home to their families, Sarah replied. I know what the right math is. The general was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked away, back out the window, and Sarah saw something in her profile she hadn't expected. She looked tired. Not the physical kind, the deep kind. The kind that lives behind your ribs and doesn't go away with sleep. Sarah felt something move in her chest, something she hadn't expected at all. Oh, she thought, this is going to be complicated. By the end of the second week, Sarah had learned 3 important things about General Raina Voss. First, she was not actually cold, she was controlled. There was a massive difference, and Sarah only figured it out when she caught Raina holding a sparrow that had flown into the window, cradling it in both hands with impossible gentleness, whispering to it until it calmed down enough to fly away. Raina had turned to find Sarah watching and gone completely still, like she'd been caught doing something shameful. Don't, Raina had said. I didn't say anything, Sarah replied. Don't make it into something. A woman being gentle isn't something I need to make into anything, Sarah said simply. It just is. Raina had looked at her strangely after that. Second, Raina didn't sleep well. Sarah heard her pacing at night, the soft rhythmic sound of boots on stone moving back and forth, back and forth. Once, very late, Sarah had gotten up and knocked softly on the adjoining door between their rooms. There had been a long silence, and then Raina had said, Go back to sleep, Cole. I can't sleep either, Sarah lied. Another silence. Then, why not? New place, new assignment. My brain won't shut up. Sarah sat against the door on her side. What's your excuse? A pause. Then Raina's voice, quieter than Sarah had ever heard it. Coldmere, I keep seeing the bridge go up. Were you scared? Sarah asked. I was certain. A beat. Those aren't the same thing. No, Sarah agreed softly. They're not. They had talked through the door until almost dawn, about battles and decisions, and the weight of being the person everyone expected to be fearless. Sarah had talked, too, about being overlooked, about being underestimated, about how she had learned to use people's low expectations as cover. When the sun started to come up, Raina had said, quietly, You're strange, Cole. Probably, Sarah agreed, smiling against the door. I don't hate it. That had been the moment Sarah stopped pretending this assignment was simple. Third thing she learned, Raina noticed everything. She noticed when Sarah favored her left shoulder on cold mornings. She noticed when Sarah was distracted, because Sarah blinked differently. She noticed when Sarah found something genuinely funny versus when she was being polite. You're studying me, Sarah said one afternoon, catching Raina's gaze from across the library table. I study everything, Raina said, not even slightly embarrassed. It's how I win. This isn't a battle. Raina tilted her head. Isn't it? Sarah leaned forward slightly. What would winning look like to you? Raina opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time since Sarah had met her, she seemed genuinely uncertain. I don't know, she admitted. Then, like it cost her something. That's new. Sarah felt the pull between them like gravity, like standing at the edge of something and knowing the only honest move was to lean forward. She sat back instead, gave them both room. Tell me about your first battle, Sarah said. Not the strategy, what it felt like. And Raina, the woman who made generals cry, who spoke in commands and never in confessions, told her. By the third week, palace servants had started to talk. Not mean talk, curious talk. The kind that spreads because it doesn't make sense to anyone watching. The general smiles now, one servant told another, like an actual smile. With teeth. Captain Cole was laughing so hard yesterday she had to sit down, someone else added, and the general was just watching her, looking like she'd never seen anything so what? I don't know, like she didn't have a word for it. In the East Wing library, Sarah was in fact currently laughing, because Raina had just, without any apparent irony, admitted that she found geese personally threatening. They're aggressive, Reyna said, very seriously. They have no fear. A goose has never lost a single battle. You once held a mountain pass with 30 soldiers against 300 enemies, and I've never crossed a goose's path and come out with my dignity intact. Reyna paused. They're unpredictable. Unlike me, Sarah said. Reyna looked at her steadily. You're the opposite of unpredictable. Because I'm boring? Because I always know you're going to do the right thing. Reyna said it simply, like a fact. It's very calming. I'm not used to calming. Sarah's heart did something embarrassing in her chest. Reyna, she said, using the general's first name for the first time. Reyna didn't correct her. What? She asked, and her voice was softer than usual. Sarah looked at her across the table. This terrifying, brilliant, lonely woman who cradled birds and paced at night and had never had someone just stay. And felt something settle into place inside her like a key in a lock. Nothing, Sarah said quietly. Just wanted to see if you'd stop me. Reyna held her gaze. I didn't. Neither of them said anything else. But something had shifted, quietly, irrevocably between them. The Emperor summoned them on a Tuesday. Not just Reyna, both of them. There was a formal dinner, the Emperor explained, for the Southern Lords who had come to finalize a new trade agreement. He needed Reyna present because the Southern Lords respected military power above everything else, and she was the most decorated general in the Empire. You'll be civil, the Emperor told her. I'm always civil, Reyna said. You made Lord Davin's nephew cry last year. He was being rude to a kitchen servant. He deserved worse. The Emperor closed his eyes briefly. Cole, please keep her in line. I'll do my best, Sarah said pleasantly, which meant absolutely nothing. The dinner was, immediately, a disaster. Not because of Reyna, which surprised everyone. It was because of Lady Marin. Lady Marin was the eldest daughter of the most powerful Southern Lord, 26 years old, devastatingly beautiful, and had apparently decided that Sarah was the most interesting person at the table. She sat beside her, leaned close when she spoke, laughed at everything Sarah said, and touched Sarah's arm approximately 6 times in the first hour. Sarah was polite. She was always polite. But she was also sitting directly across from Reyna, and she could see, very clearly, what was happening on Reyna's face. Which was nothing. That was the problem. Reyna's face had gone completely, perfectly blank. Not the controlled emotion blank of her normal expression. The nothing. Blank. The one Sarah now recognized as meaning Reyna was feeling something she was absolutely not going to show anyone. General Voss, Lady Marin said, turning with a bright smile. You must be so grateful to have such a charming captain keeping you company. She keeps me honest, Reyna said, perfectly neutral. It's a rare skill. You must have fascinating conversations. We do, Reyna said, and looked directly at Sarah. She's very easy to talk to. I don't say that about many people. Marin, sensing a current in the air she couldn't name, smiled and turned back to Sarah. Sarah, for her part, was suddenly finding the dessert very interesting. After dinner, on the walk back to the East Wing, Reyna was quiet. Not the comfortable quiet Sarah had gotten used to. A tight, coiled quiet. She was flirting with you, Reyna said finally. I know, Sarah said. You didn't stop her. Sarah glanced at her. Should I have? A pause. I'm not your commanding officer. You don't answer to me. That's not what I asked. Sarah stopped walking. Reyna stopped too, but didn't look at her. Look at me, Sarah said. Slowly, like it cost her, Reyna turned. Her expression was controlled, but her eyes weren't. Her eyes were doing something unguarded and a little raw that Sarah had never seen before. I didn't flirt back, Sarah said quietly. I wasn't interested. A muscle in Reyna's jaw shifted. Why not? She wasn't you. The words landed in the space between them like a stone in still water. Reyna stared at her. The torch on the wall threw warm light across her face, across the scar at her jaw, across the silver of her eyes that were, right now, Not cold at all. That's a very dangerous thing to say to me, Cole, Raina said softly. I know. Sarah held her gaze. I said it anyway. For a moment, neither of them moved. The hallway was empty, the palace was quiet, and the whole world seemed to narrow down to this one lit corridor and the two of them standing in it. Raina reached out and, very slowly, tucked a loose strand of hair behind Sarah's ear. Her fingers grazed Sarah's cheek, barely a touch, gone in a second. But Sarah felt it everywhere. Go to sleep, Cole, Raina said. Her voice was rough at the edges. Good night, Raina, Sarah whispered. She walked to her room and pressed her back against the closed door and breathed. In the hallway, she was fairly certain Raina did the same. The next morning, Raina acted like nothing had happened. She was at her usual post by the window when Sarah came in, reading a military history book, perfectly composed, coffee in hand. She looked up when Sarah entered, gave a brisk nod, and went back to reading. Sarah poured her own coffee, sat across from her, picked up her own book, did not say anything. They read in silence for 20 minutes. It was, Sarah had to admit, very comfortable silence, even now. The Southern Lords are leaving tomorrow, Raina said, without looking up. Good, Sarah said. A pause. You're not going to bring up last night. Nope, Sarah agreed. Another pause. Raina turned a page. Why not? Because you're clearly processing and I'm not going to rush you. Sarah looked at her over her book. I have patience. It's basically my only superpower. Raina lowered her book slightly, looked at her. You're very unusual. You've mentioned. Most people push. Most people are bad at waiting, Sarah said. I'm very good at waiting. Raina studied her for a moment, those silver eyes moving over Sarah's face with that same careful attention she gave to battle maps. Then she went back to her book. I've never done this before, Raina said, very quietly, to the page in front of her. Sarah kept her eyes on her own book. Done what? A long pause. Felt like this, about anyone. Sarah set her book down. Raina kept her eyes on hers, but her shoulders had gone very still, like she was bracing for something. Raina, Sarah said gently, look at me. She looked up. Sarah smiled at her, not a polite smile. The real one, the one that started in her eyes. Okay, she said simply. Okay, what? Okay. I hear you. Okay. Me too. Okay. We take it at whatever pace you need. Sarah picked her book back up. There's no rush. Raina was very quiet for a moment. Then she turned back to her book, and the tension in her shoulders slowly, carefully uncoiled. You're annoyingly good at this, Raina muttered. I know, Sarah said cheerfully. The twist nobody saw coming happened that afternoon. A letter arrived from the Imperial Council. Sarah read it first, as was protocol, then passed it to Raina without a word. Raina read it. Sarah watched her face. It went very still. They're lifting my confinement, Raina said. Yes. Effective in 2 weeks. Yes. Which means your assignment is also ending. Raina set the letter down. She didn't look at Sarah. You'll be reassigned. Probably, Sarah said. The room was very quiet. Is that what you want? Raina asked. Her voice was careful, too careful, the way she spoke when she was trying to keep something leashed. No, Sarah said honestly, but it's not just my decision. Raina stood up abruptly and walked to the window. She stood with her back to the room, arms crossed, staring out at the courtyard. I could request a permanent aid, she said, after a moment. As general, it's within my authority. Sarah's heart moved. You could. That would mean staying in the palace. With me. Raina's voice was very quiet. Indefinitely. I know what it would mean. Raina turned around. She looked at Sarah across the room, and for once, there was no wall in her expression. Just her, tired and proud and trying, and more open than Sarah had ever seen her. Would you want that? Raina asked. Sarah stood up, walked across the room, stopped close enough that she had to tilt her chin up slightly to meet Reina's eyes. "Ask me properly," Sarah said softly. Reina exhaled slowly, then, quietly, "Stay, not because of the assignment, because I want you here." Sarah smiled. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes." Something moved across Reina's face that might have been relief, or happiness, or both. She reached up and tucked another strand of hair behind Sarah's ear, like she had the night before. But this time she didn't pull her hand away right after. She let her fingertips rest against Sarah's jaw, warm and careful. "Okay," Reina said softly. "Okay," Sarah agreed. The 2 weeks before Reina's official reinstatement were the sweetest and most quietly torturous of Sarah's life, because something had changed after the letter, and nothing had changed at all. Reina still woke before dawn, Sarah still followed. They still read in the library, ate in comfortable silence, talked through the door late at night when sleep wouldn't come. But now there was a weight to everything, a new awareness that sat between them like a held breath. Reina's hand would brush Sarah's when she passed a book. She would stand close enough that Sarah could feel the warmth of her. She would say Sarah's name and let it sit in the air a moment longer than necessary. And Sarah, who had claimed to be patient, who had meant it, was discovering that patience had limits. "You're doing it again," Reina said one evening. They were in the library, late. The candles were low. Reina was bent over a map of the Northern Territories, and Sarah was supposed to be reading, but had been, very obviously, not reading. "Doing what?" Sarah asked. "Looking at me." Reina didn't look up from the map. "You do it when you're thinking something you've decided not to say." Sarah set her book down. "What if I just decided to say it?" "Then say it," Reina said simply. Sarah stood up, walked to the table. Reina straightened, and they were close. Close enough that Sarah could see the faint scar at her jaw clearly, could count her eyelashes if she wanted to. "I want to kiss you," Sarah said. Direct, clear. Reina's breath shifted, almost imperceptible. "I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks," Sarah continued. "And I'm not going to keep not saying it because of, I don't know, protocol or timing, or because I'm waiting for you to move first. So there it is. I want to kiss you." Reina looked at her for a long moment. "There are," Reina said slowly, "certain things I don't do halfway. I know that about you. If I kiss you," Reina paused, "that's not something I'll be casual about." "I know that too," Sarah said softly. "That's not what I'm asking for." Reina reached up and rested her hand against the side of Sarah's face, thumb brushing along her cheekbone. It was the most deliberate, careful thing Sarah had ever been on the receiving end of. "You should know," Reina said quietly, "that I don't have any practice at this, at any of this, at being—" She seemed to search for the word. "Soft?" Sarah offered gently. "I was going to say, open." A pause. "But yes, that too." Sarah lifted her hand and covered Reina's, where it rested against her face. "I'm not asking you to be anything except what you are." Reina leaned her forehead against Sarah's. They stood there, breathing the same air, and Sarah thought that this, just this, was already one of the best moments of her life. "Tomorrow," Reina said, very quietly, "when this is official, when I'm not your assignment anymore, and you're not here under orders." She pulled back just enough to look at Sarah. "Tomorrow I'll kiss you properly, because I want it to be real, not the assignment," Sarah finished. "Okay, okay?" Sarah smiled. "I told you, I'm patient." Reina made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh, low and quiet, but real. "You're unbelievable." "You keep saying that like it's a complaint." That night, Sarah lay awake and stared at the ceiling and counted the hours. She admitted it fully to herself in the dark, completely, irreversibly gone for Reina Voss, the terrifying general who whispered to birds and hated geese and had talked through a door at 3 a.m. because she missed her fallen soldiers and didn't know how to say it out loud. The woman who had stood in a courtyard after a dinner party with something raw in her eyes because she wasn't used to wanting something and not knowing if she could have it. Sarah pressed her hand over her chest, over her stupidly delighted heart, and smiled at the ceiling. Tomorrow. Tomorrow came with a ceremony. The emperor stood in the throne room, surrounded by his council and a handful of the senior military staff. He gave a speech about valor and discipline and the empire's need for its greatest general at full capacity. He said nothing about Coldmere. He said nothing about being wrong. But he restored Reyna's full rank and command in front of every person who mattered, and Sarah watched Reyna receive it with perfect composure. Spine straight, chin level, silver eyes steady. After, she looked across the room and found Sarah. Just for a second. Just a look. But it said everything. Later, in the East Wing library, the one that was still technically hers for another day before she moved back to the general's quarters, Reyna found Sarah waiting. Sarah was by the window. The afternoon light came through in long gold lines across the floor. She turned when she heard the door. Reyna crossed the room in 4 long strides, cupped Sarah's face in both hands, and kissed her. It was warm and real and unhurried. Reyna kissed her like she was certain about it, which, Sarah supposed, she was. Reyna was certain about everything she decided to do. Sarah's hands went to Reyna's waist, and she kissed her back, and felt the whole held breath of the past weeks release all at once. When they finally separated, Reyna pressed her forehead to Sarah's, eyes still closed. "I've been thinking about that for longer than 2 weeks," Reyna said quietly. Sarah laughed softly. "Yeah? I didn't say anything, because I thought it was inappropriate. You were assigned to me. And now I'm not." "And now you're not." Reyna opened her eyes. They were very close, and her expression was open in a way Sarah knew almost nobody else had ever seen. "You said yes to staying." "I meant it." "I know." A pause. "I want to make sure you understand what you're staying for." "Sarah, I'm not easy. I have nightmares. I work too hard. I'm bad at asking for help. I care too much and don't know how to show it, and then overcorrect and go cold." "I know," Sarah said. "I'm telling you so you can decide." "Reyna." Sarah pulled back just enough to look at her properly. "I watched you for 3 weeks. I know exactly who you are. I'm not surprised by any of that." She reached up and touched the scar at Reyna's jaw, tracing it lightly with one finger. "I'm still here." Reyna turned her face slightly, into Sarah's hand. "You're going to make this very hard for me to stay composed," Reyna said softly. "Good," Sarah said. "You're too composed. It's unnerving." Reyna kissed her again, and this time she was smiling into it. The twist, when it came the next morning. A rider arrived from the north. Urgent dispatch, sealed with the mark of the border garrison. Reyna was in her new office, officially reinstated, officially back in command, when Sarah brought it to her. Reyna broke the seal. "Read it." Her face went still in a way that had nothing to do with composure. "What is it?" Sarah asked. Reyna looked up. "The garrison at North Peak has been overrun. 3 regiments, gone." A pause. "It's not a border skirmish. Someone is moving an army." Sarah held her gaze. "Who?" Reyna's jaw was tight. "The dispatch says the soldiers wore the colors of House Voss." A beat. "My family's colors," Reyna said quietly. "Someone is using my name to start a war." The council met within the hour. Sarah stood at Reyna's right side, which was not technically protocol for a captain serving as a personal aide, but nobody said anything because Reyna's expression was the kind that made people not say things. The council was panicked. Maps were spread across the table. Lords argued. Advisors talked over each other. Words like treason and pretender and the general's involvement were being floated in the kind of carefully vague way that meant everyone was afraid to say them directly to her face. Reyna listened to all of it without speaking. Then she held up one hand, and the room went silent immediately, like someone had turned off a switch. "I want to be very clear," she said. Her voice was quiet and absolutely level. I have not contacted House Voss in 4 years, not since my father made his position on my choices explicit, and I made mine equally explicit. If someone is using those colors, they are either being deceived or they are counting on my name to cause confusion. She looked around the table. What I need is not debate. What I need is to know who benefits. She looked at the northern map. North Peak Falls, the Emperor's western supply route is cut, she said. Without the western route, a siege of the capital becomes viable in 3 months. She moved her finger along the map. Someone has been planning this for a long time. The room was very quiet. Someone, said Lord Carver, one of the senior council members, carefully, who knew you would be confined to the palace and unable to respond. The implication landed like a blade. Sarah watched Raina take it in, watched her understand, fully, completely, that whoever had done this had timed it to coincide with her punishment. That they had used the Emperor's anger against her as a window. Someone who knew about Coldmere before it happened, Sarah said, and felt the room turn to look at her. The bridge decision was classified. How many people knew in advance? Silence. Then Raina turned to look at her, and there was something in her expression that was not quite surprised but close to it, like she was recalculating. That's the right question, Raina said softly. How many? Sarah asked the room. Lord Carver's face had gone very still. It took 3 hours of careful, cold questioning, Raina doing most of it, Sarah doing the parts that required someone to seem non-threatening and friendly, to establish that the classified intel about Coldmere had been leaked from inside the council room itself. By a lord who was, as of 2 hours ago, attempting to leave the capital. He was stopped at the southern gate. His horse was loaded with enough gold to start a small country. In his saddlebag was a letter from a signature Sarah didn't recognize. Raina did. My cousin Marcus, Raina said, very quietly. He always wanted a war to name himself in. She said it without emotion, but Sarah saw her hand, at her side, slowly close into a fist. Sarah stepped close, just close enough that their arms were touching. A small, deliberate contact. Raina's hand unclenched. We'll handle it, Sarah said, only for her. I know, Raina said, just as quiet. I know. Late that night, in Raina's new quarters, sparse, military practical, maps already pinned to the walls, they sat on the floor with their backs against the bed because neither of them had suggested actually using the furniture, and somehow the floor felt more honest. Raina had a glass of water. Sarah had stolen a bread roll from the kitchen. They were debriefing, battle planning, going through what came next. At some point, they stopped talking about the plan and just talked. About Raina's cousin who she'd grown up with, who she'd once genuinely loved like a brother. About Sarah's family, back in a small town in the east, who had not understood why she joined the military but sent her letters every month anyway. About how strange and unexpected the last month had been. If you hadn't volunteered, Raina said at one point, I would have spent my confinement getting more and more furious and planning 17 different ways to make the Emperor regret it. And now? Raina looked at her sideways. Now I'm glad it happened. Sarah smiled. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. When this is over, Raina said eventually, what do you want? Sarah considered. Honestly, something small. A house with a good kitchen, a garden, you complaining about geese. Raina made a sound. I don't complain about geese. I make accurate threat assessments. A house where you make accurate threat assessments about geese, Sarah corrected. That sounds perfect to me. Raina was quiet for a moment. That sounds... She stopped. Tried again. That sounds like something I'd like. Eventually. Sarah leaned her head against Raina's shoulder. Raina, after a brief pause, rested her chin on top of Sarah's head. Okay, Sarah said. Eventually. The campaign to the north lasted 6 weeks. It was not a long war. Raina didn't do long wars. She moved fast, struck smart, and had the enemy supply lines cut within the first 10 days. Her cousin Marcus, who had imagined himself a brilliant strategist, had the profound misfortune of being a brilliant strategist's cousin, and had apparently spent his life underestimating what that meant about her specifically. Sarah was with her for all of it. Not on the front line, she was an aide, not a field commander, but close, managing communications, coordinating logistics, acting as the calm, practical counterbalance to the controlled whirlwind that Reina became in campaign mode. They found a rhythm that felt, quietly, like the most natural thing Sarah had ever done. At night, in camp, Reina worked by lantern light while Sarah read or wrote dispatches or, frequently, just kept her company. Sometimes Reina talked through strategy out loud, and Sarah asked the questions that Reina needed asked. Not because Sarah always had answers, but because Reina thought better when there was someone who wasn't afraid of her to think at. "You should have been a general," Reina told her one night. "I'm good at being exactly what I am," Sarah replied. "I like the view from here." Reina had looked at her strangely after that, in the way that Sarah now recognized as Reina feeling something she hadn't catalogued yet. Marcus surrendered on a Tuesday. He had been cornered at the North Peak garrison, most of his hired army deserted or captured, his supply chain gone, his allies having recognized the direction the wind was blowing and updated their loyalties accordingly. Reina met with him privately. Sarah waited outside the tent. She heard nothing. Reina had learned, somewhere in her life, how to have very quiet conversations when she needed to. When Reina came out, she walked past Sarah without stopping, and Sarah fell into step beside her without being asked. They walked to the edge of the camp, where the land opened up into the northern plains, gold-brown grass stretching out under a gray sky. "He thought I would understand," Reina said finally. "He said we both grew up the same way, under the family name, expected to serve something we never chose." A pause. He wasn't wrong about that. "But," Sarah said, "but I chose differently." Reina looked at the plains. "He chose to burn things down. I chose." She stopped. "You chose to build," Sarah said, "even when building was harder." Reina turned to look at her. 43 battles, Sarah said. 12 bridges constructed under your command. 2 field hospitals you funded personally. I read your service record before I volunteered." She held Reina's gaze. "You've been building things this whole time. You just don't call it that." Something moved through Reina's expression that was deep and private and real. "Why did you really volunteer?" Reina asked quietly. "Not the thing you said about being annoyed." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Honest." "Because I read your record, and I thought, whoever this person is, the actual person, not the reputation, she deserves someone in her corner who isn't afraid of her." She paused, "and I wanted to be that." Reina looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Then she pulled Sarah in by the front of her jacket and kissed her in the middle of the northern plains, with the gray sky overhead and the grass bending in the wind, and Sarah kissed her back and thought that this exactly, was what she had been walking toward her whole life without knowing it. When they separated, Reina pressed her forehead to Sarah's and breathed. "I've given a lot of things to this empire," she said softly. "I don't regret most of it." A pause. "But I want something that's mine." Sarah pulled back to look at her. "You have me," she said simply. Reina closed her eyes. "Good," she said, rough and quiet. "That's enough. That's more than enough." They returned to the capital to a formal reception. The emperor gave another speech. Reina stood through it with her usual composure and received commendations for the campaign, and this time the emperor said Coldmere without wincing, which Sarah considered a form of progress. After, at the reception dinner, Lady Marin caught Sarah's eye across the room and raised an amused eyebrow. Sarah smiled back, helpless, and glanced toward Reina. Marin followed her look, took in the way Reina was standing 2 feet away with her hand brushing Sarah's, unhurried, certain, made a face that was equal parts resigned and delighted, and raised her glass in a small toast. Sarah smiled into her own glass. 6 months later, they found a house. It was not small, exactly. Reina had more enemies than average, and insisted on a defensible perimeter, which Sarah thought was excessive, and Raina was very firm about. But it had a good kitchen and a garden, and a yard with a fountain that, in their first week there, attracted 3 geese. Raina stood in the kitchen window staring at them. "They're on our property," she said. "They're geese," Sarah said. "They don't understand property law. They're establishing dominance." "Raina, they chose us." Specifically, they could have gone anywhere. Sarah came to stand beside her, looking out at the geese, who were waddling around the fountain with complete unbothered confidence. "Maybe they recognize formidable company," Sarah offered. Raina turned to look at her. Then she laughed, a real one, the kind that she let out fully, that reached her eyes, that she only seemed to do when it was just the two of them. Sarah had decided, about 4 months ago, that that laugh was one of the best things she had ever been given. "You're ridiculous," Raina said. "You love it." Raina turned back to the window. The geese waddled. The garden was green and quiet, and theirs. "Yes," Raina said, softly, "I do." Sarah leaned her head against Raina's shoulder. Outside, completely unaware that they had just witnessed a love story, the geese continued their aggressive occupation of the fountain. Some battles, Sarah thought, are worth surrendering. This one, she was very glad to lose.